On the 11th of February, just outside the shattered outskirts of Cologne, a group of exhausted German women, former auxiliary workers, medics, clerks and camp staff, were marched across muddy fields under a grey winter sky. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense, yet they had been captured during the American advance and processed as POWs. Their uniforms were torn, patched and caked with dirt. But to them, these uniforms were their last shield of dignity. Rumors spread like wildfire. Americans would strip them, humiliate them, force them to remove their clothing. These ideas came from propaganda that had shaped their world for years. Posters, radio speeches, whispered threats from retreating officers. The message was always the same. The enemy has no honor. The enemy will take everything from you, your pride, your body, your dignity. As the women approached the temporary American holding area, fear tightened their chests. Some clutched their collars closed. Others wrapped their arms around themselves. A few whispered prayers, not for survival, but for the strength to endure the humiliation they believed was coming. Among them was Greta Brandt, a 29-year-old nurse from D. She had tended wounded soldiers for 3 years and lost 2 brothers in the war. Her faith in German victory had faded, but her fear of the Americans remained unshaken. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "do not let them take your uniform." The American camp was surprisingly orderly, tents in straight rows, medics walking briskly, guards alert but calm. This calmness made the women even more nervous. They expected shouting, aggression, chaos. Instead, a young American sergeant approached with an interpreter. The women stiffened. Boots crunched on the frozen ground as guards formed a loose perimeter, close enough to ensure control, not to intimidate. The interpreter raised his voice clearly. "You will be processed. You will be searched for contraband. You will not be harmed. Do you understand?" The words offered logic but no comfort. Their minds were poisoned by fear. Then came the command that froze every woman. "Step forward." Medical inspection first to the German women. Panic rippled through the group. Medical inspection meant only one thing: forced removal of clothing. Some shook their heads violently, others stepped backward. Greta clutched her torn field jacket like a lifeline. "We won't remove our uniforms," she said, voice trembling but firm. The other women echoed, "You cannot force us, please no." The interpreter relayed their refusal to the sergeant. The American sergeant frowned, not in anger but disbelief. He stepped forward, hands raised peacefully. "No one is taking your uniforms," he said slowly. "No one will touch." The women didn't believe him. They had been told for years that Americans lied, tricked, deceived, that mercy was just bait. Greta shook her head violently. "No, we know what you want." The sergeant exchanged a look with his corporal, both baffled by their fear and suspicion. Then the Americans did something no German woman expected. The sergeant stepped back, waved the medics forward and ordered loudly, "Check them for frostbite and injuries fully clothed. Do not touch them unless absolutely necessary. Keep distance, give them control." The medics approached respectfully, keeping their hands visible. Instead of ordering the women to undress, they handed out blankets, hot water, and small tins of petroleum jelly for cracked skin. No shame, no stripping, no humiliation. The shock was immediate. One of the older women, Marta, covered her face and began to cry, not from fear but from overwhelming relief. Another muttered, "This cannot be real. This is not how enemies behave." The Americans were treating them gently, more carefully than their own officers had during the retreat. Within minutes, medics moved down the line, checking frostbitten fingers, assessing malnutrition, offering water canteens, still fully clothed, still respected, still safe. The women looked at each other, disbelief slowly transforming into confusion, then something even more disorienting: gratitude. Greta's inspection lasted less than a minute. The medic simply looked at her hands, noticed the cracked skin and said, "Nurse." She nodded cautiously. "You've been treating wounded for a long time," he said softly. She didn't expect kindness and didn't know how to respond. When he handed her a small tin of ointment, Greta took it with shaking fingers. But the real shock came after the inspection. The sergeant ordered his men to bring coffee, bread and stew from the field kitchen. The guards placed the food on a table and stepped back, giving the women complete space. No force, no pressure, just food, warm and real. The women hesitated, still expecting a trick. But hunger broke the wall of fear. One by one they approached the table. Greta took a metal cup of coffee, hands trembling. The warmth seeped into her fingers, chest and lungs. Tears filled her eyes. Many women wiped tears with dirty sleeves. A realization slowly crept into Greta, a realization more shocking than any brutality could have been. Everything they had been taught about Americans was collapsing. Instead of humiliation, they gave dignity. Instead of cruelty, kindness. Nothing had prepared them for that. The heavy wooden door shut behind them with a thick, echoing thud. For a moment, the German women froze inside the old American depot, backs straight, hands clenched at their sides, nerves stretched tight. The room was warm, unexpectedly warm, lit by lanterns that hummed faintly. The contrast to the cold outside was intense. Their uniforms were still damp with winter air, boots stiff from days of marching, faces pale from exhaustion. They refused to remove a single piece of clothing, loosen a button or bow their heads. The American guards knew this and didn't move closer. They simply watched. Minutes ticked by. The German women remained tense, shoulders locked as if waiting for accusation, punishment or humiliation. Instead, silence. Finally, the oldest guard, Sergeant Miller, lifted a clipboard. "All of you," he said calmly, "sit down. You're safe here." The women exchanged alarmed looks. Safe? Had they heard him correctly? Fräulein Becker, the sharp-faced medic of their group, stepped forward with defiance. "We will not take off our uniforms," she said, voice shaking but proud. "It's not required," Miller replied calmly. The entire room seemed to freeze. The women stared. No one had expected that answer. No one had prepared them. In every camp rumor, every whispered tale, every fear-filled night, they had been taught to expect the worst when captured. Yet these Americans looked tired, cold, and strangely patient. Still, the women didn't relax. Conditioning doesn't vanish with a single sentence. Miller walked to a crate, opened it, and pulled out a bundle of folded fabric. He placed it gently on the table and stepped aside. One of the younger guards explained, "Blankets, wool ones, from our supply. You can keep your uniforms. We're just trying to make the night easier." The women blinked in shock. Fräulein Weber, barely 19, whispered, "Why? Why would they do this?" No one answered. Even the Americans didn't seem to know exactly what to say. Miller motioned to the blankets. "You don't have to take anything off," he repeated. "It's freezing outside. You'll rest better with these." The German POWs didn't move, not because they didn't want to, but because fear still held real power inside the room. When no one stepped forward, the Americans exchanged quiet glances. They knew the women didn't trust them and didn't take it personally. War created walls far thicker than concrete. So the guards did something none of the women expected. They left. The Americans stepped out, shut the door and stood outside, their footsteps fading. Inside the depot, a slow silence grew, heavy as snowfall. The women looked at each other, stunned. No guards, no orders. Slowly, one of the older women, Greta Hoffman, a former schoolteacher turned auxiliary worker, walked forward. She hovered over the blanket stack as if expecting a trap. Her hand trembled as her fingertips brushed the wool. Warm, thick, clean. Her throat tightened. She picked up a blanket and held it to her chest. Nothing happened. Nobody stormed in. Nobody punished her. Seeing this, the others approached hesitantly, unsure but drawn by hope. One by one, each woman took a blanket. They wrapped them around their uniforms, pulling tight as if afraid someone would snatch the comfort away. That's when they heard footsteps again. The door opened. The guards returned, carrying metal trays. "We brought dinner," said a younger guard, Harris, softly. Dinner, not rations thrown on the floor. Not scraps, not humiliation. Actual dinner. The smell of stew, potatoes, carrots, onions, fresh bread filled the room. The women stared at the food as if it were unreal. For days, they had lived on crumbs and fear. Their bodies trembled, not from cold, but from overwhelming disbelief. "We're not forcing you," Harris added, stepping back. "Eat if you want, we'll be outside." The reaction was immediate. Fräulein Weber burst into quiet, uncontrollable tears. Becca, the strong one who never cried, sank onto a bench with a shaking breath. Greta clasped her hands over her mouth, whispering, "They're treating us like people." The words cracked something open inside every woman. For the first time since their capture, fear loosened its grip. For the first time, they sat down without being ordered. For the first time, they allowed themselves a tiny, fragile moment of peace. They ate slowly, cautiously, savoring every bite as if it were a memory to record forever. Not because the food was extraordinary, but because it was given with dignity. Later that night, wrapped in blankets and huddled together, the women whispered about what had happened. Not the war, not their commanders, not their capture, but kindness. Unexpected, disarming, almost painful kindness. Outside, the American guards sat by a small stove, exhausted and silent. They didn't know that inside the depot, the German women were experiencing something far more powerful than fear or surrender. They were experiencing a glimpse of humanity, something war had nearly stolen, leaving them speechless.